What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Pick Six Podcast, CBS Sports Daily NFL Podcast. I'm Will Brinson. I'm your host. It is Sunday, January 9th in the morning. Ooh, special morning time emergency podcast. Probably shouldn't laugh about it because somebody got fired. Vic Fangio out as Denver Broncos head coach before the main slate of Week 18 action kicks off to break down Fangio's firing and to look at possible candidates, what happens next for Fangio, et cetera, et cetera. Joining me is John Breach. Breach, what's up, buddy?
Yeah, there's no Black Monday anymore, Brinson. Now it's Black Sunday, man. This is
disrespectful of the Broncos to fire him like before Sunday's action.
Well, and the NFL coming out with these Saturday games for the first time in 15 years, which means we're getting Sunday morning. There's going to be Friday games in Week 18, and then we're going to have firings on Saturday. It's going to get out of hand. It's already out of hand.
I've always been in the camp of I love more football, and I do love more football. I don't need Saturday games in Week 18. I don't need two Saturday games in Week 18, and I don't need the loser of one of the Saturday games firing their coach on Sunday in Week 18. Vic Fangio, just 3 years in Denver, did not make the playoffs, was asked on Saturday night after he lost to the Chiefs, and said, it was asked, like, what's the difference? How come the Broncos aren't able to compete with the rest of the division, the Raiders, the Chargers, and, of course, the Chiefs? And he's like, I think it's pretty obvious 3 of those teams have a good quarterback, which is sort of throwing shade on Drew Lock, I guess. But mainly
you're throwing the front office under the bus by saying,
exactly,
hey, if someone would get me a good quarterback, we would be a good team.
19-30 in his 3 years. That's not great. 7-9, 5-11, and 7-10. 2 last place finishes in fourth in the AFC West over the last 2 years in 2020 and 2021. Look, I would say that Vic Fangio, I don't know that he got a raw deal. There's lots of things that he's done that make him like, I didn't think he was necessarily a great coach, but he didn't have a quarterback. He is in a difficult division. The defense always played well, and he had this team like in competition with for a wild card spot at various points over his 3 years. He's always had very good defenses, but I'm not really shocked that the Broncos are firing him here. The Broncos brought in George Payton this past offseason as the new GM. John Elway took a different job in the front office. And so Elway had hired Vic Fangio. Payton was brought in and decided to keep Fangio for one more year. I actually think it's a smart move by a GM to do that. If you come in like whoever the GM is for the Giants, you have to come in knowing that you can fire the old guy after 1 year if you want to. Like, I would rather do a full year evaluation, I think, unless there's a candidate you love out there, and then move on, than just come in and clear house and all of a sudden there's pressure on your new candidate. So I don't have a problem with it. And his final act, of course, Breach, kicking a field goal down 7 points to the Kansas City Chiefs with nothing to play for.
Yeah, that's really funny. I'm glad you just mentioned that, Brinson, because it was like Vic Fangio fired himself by making that decision. Where if the Broncos were on the fence, because all week we heard they may let Fangio go. It didn't seem like they had 100% made the decision. And George Payton's probably sitting down watching that game thinking, there's no way he's kicking the field goal here. There's 4 minutes and 37 seconds left. We're down by a touchdown. We cannot give the ball back to Patrick Mahomes, and a field goal doesn't help us at all. And if you did not watch this game, the Broncos had a 4th and 9 from the Chiefs 13 with 4:30 left in the game. They were trailing 28-21, and Fangio called for a field goal. The Chiefs got the ball back, ran out the clock. Denver never saw it again, and that's exactly what you would think would happen with Mahomes. So you have to do it. But Brent, I do agree with you that
ironically, though, the Breach that the analytics said that kicking the field goal was a smart play there.
I mean,
it goes to show you that analytics, as we've all noted, are stupid.
Analytics,
air yards? What are air yards?
Analytics doesn't tell you whether the guy getting the ball back is Patrick Mahomes or whether it's Zach Wilson. I think
it does. I think it does. But
no, it doesn't. It doesn't tell you. It's the raw percentages. The raw percentages just tell you how it improves your chances to win the game. It doesn't take into account whether you're playing the guy who might be trying to round out the clock.
No, it does.
It doesn't.
What are you talking about?
I'm talking about.
We're not going to have this conversation right now. We'll get Ben Baldwin on the show in the offseason and ask him whether or not he inputs power ratings inputs basic power ratings for NFL teams into his analytics, because I'm guessing that he does. But at any rate, I digress. Go ahead.
So I do agree with you, though, that Fangio absolutely got a raw deal. I don't have a problem with them getting rid of him because of decisions like that. There's, conservative coaching is going to hold you back. And so, you want somebody who's going to be a little bit more aggressive. But man, Fangio had it rough. As he said, he didn't have a quarterback and he wasn't in charge of bringing in his own quarterback. He had zero say in that decision.
Correct.
So he's got to play the cards that are dealt. And he did a good job of that. I mean, and you really look at, he had them in the playoff hunt this year. You look at 3 of the final 4 games that they played this season. They ended on a 4-game losing streak, but 3 of their final 4 losses were all by 5 points or less to teams that could all make the playoffs. They lost to the Bengals by 5. They lost to the Raiders by 4. They lost to the Chiefs by 4. And the Chiefs game, I mean, they win that probably if Melvin Gordon doesn't fumble it.
They're marching down the field to win the game, to ruin the Chiefs' chances at the number 1 seed. And Melvin Ingram smacks Melvin Gordon and yada, yada, yada.
Well, not even win the game, to ice the game, because they were up 21-20
to seal the game.
Right. And
seal the deal.
And that's on Vic Fangio, that the Broncos were out there shutting down the Chiefs offense. It's not, what can he do? You can't get on the field and force Melvin Gordon not to fumble.
Does Vic Fangio get fired if they win that game?
I don't think he does. And
wow.
So I think I do think they were on the fence, and that losing and that dumb field goal, that's like the final straw. Like, I think they were leaning towards firing him, and maybe
we're probably going to fire him. But if they go out there and they play their asses off for Vic, and Drew Lock looks decent, and they beat the Chiefs, and you're right. Like, you look at the schedule. By the way, the Pythagorean theorem, which is point score, is basically your point differential. Can show you how many wins a team is supposed to have. This is a 9-8 win team, or 9 win team, 8.9 win team. Essentially, their point differential says that this team should have gone 9-8, which would have them. I mean, I guess they wouldn't be in the playoffs, but they would be, they would be right there. Like, the point being is, like, this is not that terrible of a team, and depending on who the Broncos hire, it is perfectly reasonable, and depending on what they do at the quarterback position, it is perfectly reasonable to suggest that this team could, be like the 49ers when they hired Harbaugh, where all of a sudden it's like the breakout team that surprises everybody in 2022. Their other loss, they won what a weird team. They won their first 3 games, Giants, Jaguars, Jets, sort of like the Panthers, lost their next 4, Ravens, Steelers, Raiders, Browns, won 3 of the next 4, and 4 of the next 6, and then went on a 4-game losing streak to close the season. I mean, the bottom line is you lose, you win 38%, 39% of your games, and you're probably getting fired.
And I do think the interesting part was, you look back, their first game in November, they played the Cowboys, and they went to Dallas and they destroyed them. You remember that game? They were up like 30-0. Everybody look at their TV. Is that scoreboard right? Is there a typo? What's going on here? And that made their record 5-4. So at that point, it was, hey, the Broncos are just past midseason. They're above 500. They just destroyed one of the best teams in the NFC. This team maybe can compete for a playoff spot down the stretch. And then, obviously they don't compete for a playoff spot down the stretch. And I think the way they ended the season with 4 straight losses, that's where, you're in a playoff chase. You think you want them playing tough for you. And obviously they are, because 3 of these 4 losses were close. But you can't end the season like that when you're on the hot seat. You lose 4 straight games end the season when you're on the hot seat, you're losing your job.
Yeah. And I think I think it's worth noting that this job, while attractive in a vacuum with the roster that they have, the defensive players that they have, the potential, if you will, to snare a quarterback and to maybe you become the breakout team, as I mentioned, there is a bit of a downside. And you see it in this stretch to close out the season. They win 1 of their final 6 games. 2 of those games against the Kansas City Chiefs. 1 against and they beat the Chargers once after the bye, obviously. But they have to play the Chargers after down the stretch. You have to play the Raiders down the stretch, and maybe the Raiders will be different in a little bit. We'll see what happens with the Raiders. My point being is the AFC West. If you take a job in the AFC West as the one team that doesn't have a good quarterback, you are running the risk of having to get fired after a couple of years because you don't make the playoffs. If you don't make the playoffs in 3 years as an NFL head coach, unless you're taking over a job where I mean, Zach Taylor was going to get fired probably if the Bengals win 5 games this year, right?
I mean, it wouldn't have been surprising.
Right. And so Zach Taylor could have been Vic Fangio, except Zach Taylor managed to win a bunch of games and make the playoffs. If you don't make the playoffs in 3 years as an NFL head coach, teams are going to want to move on. And particularly if you're a guy like Vic Fangio, who, as you can see, not very good on offense ever. I mean, they 11th ranked defense. No surprise. He's been a great defensive coordinator, but they stink on offense. And, he was never people. You had Broncos fans greatly dislike the things that Vic Fangio did in terms of calling offense, in terms of hiring offensive coordinators. Pat Shurmur he brought in. People thought maybe Shurmur could be the guy to help take him over the top. Look, the Vic Fangio needed to get the Packers job. Like he needed to get and that sounds sort of simplistic, I guess, but like he needed to be the guy who was hired by Green Bay. It's like, hey, Aaron, do what you want on offense. I'm going to go coach up this defense. I'm not saying like Matt LaFleur hadn't done a great job. He's like 39-9 or whatever it is. But
you're saying that would have been a better fit for him than a situation.
Like the Broncos were good on defense already. It's not hard to coach up the Broncos defense. What you needed was Vic Fangio needed a job where the offense was okay already. So, he needed a Chargers job.
Well, and that's the thing is that when you're bread and butter, you're a defensive coach and you're stuck in a division with 2 of the 6 highest scoring teams in the NFL, the Chiefs and the Chargers, then the deck's stacked against you. I mean, that is a tough thing to deal with. And to go back, you could, you talking about how Fangio could have worked out better with the Green Bay or with maybe even with the New York Giants, even though they weren't hiring at the same time. But, that goes along with, there was speculation that Tom Brady didn't want to go to the Chargers because you're dealing with Patrick Mahomes. It's harder to win the division, at least,
by the way, he took the job knowing Patrick Mahomes was there.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so but that was 2018 when he was hired, which was, you don't know how good Patrick Mahomes is yet.
No. His first year was 2019.
Oh yeah. So he
literally took the job after Patrick Mahomes threw 50 passing touchdowns and
won a Super Bowl, thinking, "Hey,
they didn't win the Super Bowl.
They lost in the AFC title game in 2018.
Everyone was well aware that Andy Reid had a like. In fact, if you were picking one time to not take that job, it would have been 2019 when you just seen Patrick Mahomes destroy the league and pile up 5,000 passing yards and 50 passing touchdowns.
And so, and defense is your bread and butter. You're not going to slow down. And then now the Chargers have Justin Herbert. You don't want to be a defensive coordinator in that. I mean, maybe you do because you want the challenge, but if you want to keep your job for a while, you don't want to be a defensive guy as a head coach being forced to slow down both of those guys because you have to play them twice a season, which is 4 out of your 17 games. That is a tough ask of anybody, especially when your offense can't win shootouts because they don't have a quarterback. So, maybe, we're saying Vic Fangio got a raw deal, but maybe he was not cut out to coach in the AFC West. And so it will be interesting to see what the Broncos do. Because do you bring in an offensive coach or a defensive coach? You got to bring in an offensive coach because you're going to be in shootouts and you need someone who can win shootouts, right?
Yeah, smash that like button if you're watching on YouTube. I'm giggling because Brittany Dunn in the YouTube comments caught a Devo typo. I don't know if you saw this, but it was Vin Fangio was fired by the Broncos for
that. Sounds fitting. Like it just Vin Fangio sounds very Italian.
Vin Fangio. Vin Fangio wins 10 games with Denver, I think.
Vin Fangio is a Super Bowl winning coach.
He does not kick a field goal last night.
No. Vin Fangio. We're going for 2 after the touchdown to go off at 12. Let's go. I don't know. Why am I talking like Mario?
The Broncos go undefeated with Vin Fangio.
That's right. The Broncos. Drew Lock is an MVP with Vin Fangio. I would also point out that, we're saying like, you don't want to take that job. Vic Fangio has been a coach in the NFL for a really, 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 really long time. This is his first opportunity to get a head coaching job. If he got offered a head coaching job, he was taking it. Just like Mike Zimmer, who, by the way, could be an interesting name to watch for the Denver Broncos. Is Mike Zimmer on the list of potential head coaches? I'll tell you next. Sorry, Anthony, for my terrible Italian accent. It wasn't that terrible, was it?
It sounded like you were being a half Mario brother, half Brinson.
We play a lot of Mario Brothers in the Brinson household. So
Okay, well, in your defense, then it was spectacular.
Okay, it wasn't a disparaging accent. It was really more like a Mario accent. And he's Italian. The spaghetti. Anyway, Mike Zimmer I think Mike Zimmer is interesting for the Broncos job, and not because he's the polar opposite of Vic Fangio, because he's basically Vic Fangio with with a better head coaching record. Grumpy old former defensive coordinator who never got any good looks as a head coach, finally got one, took it. Defense first, loves kicking field goals. Happened to work with a GM who was willing to pay Kirk Cousins. But the reason why it could potentially make sense is George Payton came from Minnesota. I mean, you saw him. They brought, and I don't know whether Payton and Mike Zimmer have a good relationship. If they do, and Mike Zimmer is in fact fired by the Vikings, as many people believe he will be, it would make a lot of sense that they hire him, even though he's sort of in the same mold. I do think there's a history of Zimmer at least having a good offense with his Vikings teams, despite maybe the lack of a quarterback presence. So that might be the selling point if they have a good relationship. And again, I don't know if they do, but
I mean, Zimmer was there, or Zimmer and Payton were together for 7 years. So it's not like it was
right. I mean, like if Payton hates Mike Zimmer,
somebody would have done something, or Zimmer could have forced him out, because I think Payton was the assistant general manager for a while. So I mean, if Zimmer didn't like him, he could have made it known.
They didn't like each other. It would be really surprising for them to work together for 7 years.
Right.
Like you would have heard some chatter, some buzz about that, or like Peyton's name wouldn't have come up as often as it did as a possible head or GM candidate.
But yeah, so he was in Minnesota from 2014 to 2020.
Like it is not unreasonable to think that they might like each other. And so do you think that has legs, Breach, or will Denver fans be too disgusted at the idea of another head coach like that?
Yeah, I don't think because of the relationship between the general manager and Zimmer, I don't hate the idea, but you can't go back to the same well twice. I mean, Mike Zimmer is a Vic Fangio clone. They coach the
Vic Fangio is a Mike Zimmer clone.
Yes. Yeah, Fangio is a Mike Zimmer clone. They have similar coaching styles that they want to win by running the ball and playing defense. And the Broncos have that perfect setup because they have Javonte Williams, they have Melvin Gordon, you don't need a quarterback. Of course, Zimmer doesn't like Kirk Cousins.
Sign Case Keenum.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know that I think
the Broncos fans would not
be upset if
it.
Zimmer got hired.
Yeah. They would be like, are you kidding me? You fired Vic Fangio to hire Vic Fangio Sr.?
Right. Just keep Vic Fangio. So I feel like they're going to go either. And Jason Lockenfora, who reported on Saturday that Fangio was out, said that one of the top candidates would probably be Dan Quinn. And that makes more sense to me because he's more of a modern coach.
He's basically not grumpy. Is what
right. He's not grumpy. He understands how to coach in today's game. Not that Zimmer and Fangio don't, but I think he is just overall, he's a guy who's going to pay attention to analytics, which I think is what people want to see now. Obviously we've seen what he's done in Dallas. He absolutely turned around that defense, and he's been to a Super Bowl.
Yeah, and Dan Quinn has success as an NFL head coach, and you heard it on the broadcast on Saturday night. The Monday Night Football guys were, when that game ended, it was super weird because I first for 5 minutes I was like, wait a minute, it's so late on Monday. I was like, oh my god, it's only 11:30 on Saturday. This is fantastic.
I got time to get in the scotch.
Yeah,
and a whiskey. This
is a great question from Animal. Yeah, got into the whiskey. Great question from Animal Science TV. Is the why am I saying potential like that? Is the potential is the potential owner change in Denver going to make it hard to get a good coach? That's a really good question. So the way that for those, Pat Bowlen died, and there's been a ton of infighting amongst his heirs, I think it's basically his kids are just fighting, and maybe there's a cousin or an aunt in there. They've basically been fighting to figure out who is going to get the Broncos. I think that the NFL has probably gotten sick enough of it that they are just going to force the Bowlen Family Trust to sell, because they don't. Essentially, all these kids have been trying to show hey, I'm worthy of running the Broncos, except the NFL, it doesn't operate like that. it's not a, these teams are technically, you can be a family owned business or whatever it is, but the NFL will, if it doesn't believe that the ownership group is acceptable, they will not just allow, granted, if you're the current owner, you can do whatever you want basically forever. See Dan Snyder. But if if you die, you're not, your son, and you're like, if you don't have a transition plan in place, the NFL will force the trust to sell. And I think that's probably what's going to happen with Denver, which means, yes, it will make it more difficult to land a good head coach. George Payton, it's weird with Denver because they've been, owned by the Bowlen family for so long. You have John Elway is prominently involved. You have a GM, and it's just a weird situation. I would guess that the transition for the ownership sale will take longer than it does to grab a new head coach. So I don't know that this head coach will necessarily impact the owners. I don't know that the ownership will necessarily impact this head coach. I do think that you would not be able to go get, let's say for whatever reason, this is not happening, just for whatever reason, Mike Tomlin quits the Steelers. I don't think they're the Broncos. I don't think Mike Tomlin would go to the Broncos knowing that there could be a potential ownership change, which could lead to a GM change, which could lead to a coaching change. Joe Ellis probably sticks around through the ownership change. The president and CEO could get canned. So yeah, that all of that could impact it. Just look at Carolina. What was the other recent sale? Carolina, Ron Rivera was never surviving that ownership change with David Tepper, is my point.
Yeah. And just to boil down everything Brinson just said about Broncos ownership, basically there was a lawsuit last summer. It got dismissed, but there's 7 kids and they're all basically fighting about who should be running the team. And the trust, Joe Ellis runs the trust. He's the de facto owner, acting as the de facto owner because he makes the decisions, has said that the trust is going to sell the team because these kids basically can't decide who's going to run it. So just, let's just sell. So I think we will probably see a Broncos sale at some point this summer. But as Brinson said, the Broncos aren't going to be waiting until the summer to hire a head coach. And so I think if you're the head coach, if you're a general manager, you might be worried about the ownership. But if you're the head coach, that's probably not something you're going to worry about because you're thinking, as long as this GM's in place and as long as my contract's fully guaranteed, which head coaching contracts are, you sign a 5-year, $50 million deal, you're getting that money no matter who owns the team. So you are fine with that. You are probably aware of it. Hey, there could be a few rough patches because new ownership, maybe, and not that Jeff Bezos is going to buy the team. I'm just throw his name out there because he is a rich, aggressive person. He might go in there and do what David Tepper did, sit around for a year or two and say, yeah, none of this is working. We're blowing it up. We're starting over. I'm getting rid of the general manager. I'm getting rid of the head coach. I'm getting rid of everyone. And so if you get someone aggressive like that, then maybe you're worried about that as a head coach, but you can't worry about that taking this job. So I think anyone that wants to be a head coach and wants the Broncos job will take it regardless of how they feel about who might end up owning the team.
Yeah, that's correct. Especially if, as we would anticipate, you have a GM already in place. So look, it's the same thing with the Giants, right? You're trying to hire, except inverse. You're trying to hire a GM, but your head coach is likely going to be there in Joe Judge. It greatly reduces the number of candidates available to you when you have someone in one of those positions. You already have, George Payton is the GM. You're not a coach coming in. I don't know that somebody asked, Brittany asked in the chat, does Harbaugh leave? Hardball. I like hardball. Oh, wait, did Brittany make a typo after mocking Debo? Oh no, toss it up on the screen. Get your revenge, Debo. Does Hardball leave Michigan for Denver? Vin Hardball, bouncing out of Michigan. So I don't know that Harbaugh, I really think that your situation matters as a coach with this Denver job. For instance, I don't know that Jim Harbaugh. I don't know that Jim Harbaugh leaves Michigan, his alma mater, where he just went to the college football playoff, for Denver, knowing that there's already a GM in place that he has to work for, and knowing that there could be an ownership change, even though he has the cachet to exist without, to exist through an ownership change, I believe, because of his name value and if he's winning. But I just think you're more likely to get a head coach who is really enthusiastic about getting a first job, right? Like a Vic Fangio, basically.
Right. Or, I mean, even a Dan Quinn who, if he wants to be a head coach again, because he's thinking, hey, look, this DC stuff was fun, but I'm better as a head coach. I've proved that. And I think the other thing with Harbaugh is that there's potentially going to be two more enticing jobs, and that's the Raiders, where he got his coaching start. And he knows Mark Davis will give him whatever power he wants. He doesn't have
to. Exactly. That's the polar opposite. Right. You can basically come in and say, I want Mayock out. I want a 10-year deal like Gruden got, and Mark Davis is not selling that team anytime soon.
Right. And then the Bears, if that comes open, I think Harbaugh would be very interested in, because he was he started his career there. So I don't think that the Broncos would be one of the jobs that Jim Harbaugh would look into.
Yeah, I would not think Jim Harbaugh is a Broncos guy, but I mean, weirder things have happened that they gave him total control. Some names that we can throw out for the Broncos job. I think we can safely eliminate we put him on a list for like 10 years now. Josh McDaniels. Feels like we can eliminate him from Broncos consideration.
The first time ever. He is not a candidate.
Yeah. Josh McDaniels famously fired by the Denver Broncos mid-season in his second year after drafting Tim Tebow.
What
a world. Any other names that stand out for you?
I think an interesting one, and he already got interviewed by Jacksonville, would be Doug Peterson. Look, if you got a Super Bowl winning coach out there, you got to at least talk to him. And Doug Peterson's offensive minded. He'll bring in a smart defensive coach. So he is somebody if I have a coaching opening, I am talking to Doug Peterson. And then there's also, the obvious offensive candidates that we always talk about: Brian Dable, Byron Leftwich, Eric Bieniemy. I don't know, would Bieniemy leave for a division rival? It's kind of what I guess Brian Flores did when he was the Patriots de facto defensive coordinator, even though no one technically had that title. And then went to the Dolphins, but you just don't see it that often. So I think Bieniemy would be an interesting hire, although I think the Chiefs' offensive struggles this year have kind of, he's not the hottest candidate going into this offseason like he was the past 2 years. And then obviously Leftwich. But yeah, it's going to be interesting because this is a team you don't know if they're going to go with a defensive guy or an offensive guy. And so that leaves it wide open. The door is wide open for anyone to just kind of jump in and take this job.
By the way, so this is a random emergency podcast. I didn't give Brittany her dunk. I should have given her a dunk when she misspelled.
Oh, he missed! He missed! Oh, and he may have pulled a hamstring or a muscle, and there is complete elation.
There you go, Brittany. You got dunked on. Who day? She requested a Bengals dunk. Yeah, I think offensive-minded head coach is probably the direction that the Broncos go. And Dan Quinn would make sense. I would not have a problem with Dan Quinn. It's just like, if you either go offensive-minded head coach, or you go with, and this is how you really should do it always, a guy who has a plan, right? You go with a defensive guy, like a Dan Quinn can come in and say, here, I'm high. When Dan Quinn went to the Falcons, who did he hire on offense? Kyle Shanahan. If you've got a defensive guy like a Dan Quinn comes in and says, I'm going to hire this guy as my offensive coordinator. Kellen Moore is coming with me as my offensive coordinator. Where do I sign if I'm the Broncos? So that's not going to happen. Kellen Moore's probably going to get his own job. Gerard Mayo, and everybody's misspelling everything today. Gerard Mayo only has one R. Mike Kinney put up Doug Peterson. It's Doug Peterson. D. You guys do this on purpose to us? What is it? This guy is drunk.
If Vin Fangio got fired, then all of these are legit.
Yeah. I assume they're all joking with us, but who the hell knows? Anyway, yeah, I think your list is good. I think offensive-minded guys, probably like an offensive coordinator type or a retread offensive guy, like a Doug Peterson.
And Mayo's, he's a position coach in New England, so I don't think that would be a huge leap for him to go from position coach to head coach. So I don't think, and maybe Belichick will give him more responsibility next season or two, and that will make him a head coaching candidate. But I don't think we'll see him this offseason.
And we've also seen the Broncos fail hiring a Bill Belichick coaching tree guy in Josh McDaniels. So maybe, I think this Denver job, because of maybe if no one is interested, if Doug Peterson and Dan Quinn aren't interested because of the ownership stuff, because there's a GM already in place, then maybe you see them forced into the position coach role, hiring somebody outside the box. That's sort of how that happens. If the search goes on for a lengthy amount of time, then it will drastically open the number of candidates that they will be interested in, probably out of necessity, an unfortunate necessity for the Denver Broncos.
And I think one crazy thing though is that now we have half this division possibly looking for a head coach, unless the Raiders stick with their interim coach, which maybe they do. If you win the Sunday night and then wins a playoff game, maybe you
Would be
keep the job.
First head coach fired after making the playoffs since
Mike Mularkey with the
That's
Titans.
right, Breach.
In Nashville.
Okay. Any other thoughts on the Denver Broncos head coaching position?
Sorry, Vic.
You're
going to mention where Vic might land up. Vic
Yes.
Fangio. If Dan Quinn takes the Broncos job, maybe Vic goes to Dallas.
Oh my God! I thought you were going to say maybe he hires Vic Fangio as his DC.
Yeah.
I don't think he'll do that.
No, maybe he replaces Fangio in Dallas. I think that would be
Mike McCarthy
interesting.
coached against Vic Fangio for a long time when he was in Green Bay and Vic Fangio was in Chicago. So certainly some familiarity there. That would make a lot of sense. Look, Fangio will 100% have a defensive coordinator job next year. Like, he is such a good defensive coordinator that he's the type of guy that you fire your defensive coordinator to hire Vic Fangio.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, actually, you know where let's see. You know where he might end up?
Ooh, where?
This is actually a sneaky one. Los Angeles Chargers.
I like it.
Brandon Staley is his mentor is Vic Fangio. Like, he followed Vic Fangio around and like basically runs a Vic Fangio defense. Ronaldo Hill has done a good job, and I don't think that Brandon Staley would want to rock the boat. But I think if given his druthers, especially if the Chargers miss the playoffs and like the Raiders toss up 30 on them, I would almost guarantee that Vic Fangio comes to the Chargers, and he would get 2 revenge games against Denver a year.
Right.
And you have a loaded defense with Joey Bosa, Derwin James, etc.
And, you talk about, Brandon Staley's a defensive guy too. So he probably thought, hey, I can keep my hands on the defense. And he probably realized how hard it is this year to run an NFL team and try and pay attention to what's going on both sides of the ball. And, the Chargers defense hasn't been great this year. We've seen them just get run on. And so if you bring in someone like Vic Fangio, who just has been so good as a defensive coordinator, I don't think that's crazy. You get that revenge angle, Brinson. I love it. If the Chargers call him, I'm sure he would definitely pick up the phone.
I'm not going to do it now because it would be just impossible. But I believe the Athletic and the LA Times both profiled Fangio. Fangio hired Brandon Staley to be his outside linebackers coach in Chicago. And Staley, before the season, talked at length about how Fangio helped him really like learn and develop, his defensive tendencies. And so that would be a prime landing spot.
Yeah, and that was and not only did Vic Fangio hire him as the linebackers coach in Chicago, but he hired him from a Division III college. This is someone
John Carroll.
Seeing like this prodigy and saying, yeah, I think this guy could make it from the D3. I think he can make the jump to the NFL, which is a huge jump. And he did it, and it worked. Now Staley's a head coach, and that's Staley's like, I'm going to pay my buddy back because he's smart, brilliant.
I just think Staley's like, I can if there's a trump card here where I can get the best defensive coordinator candidate in there. And so obviously you wouldn't want to fire somebody that you hired as your DC, but if a chance to get Vic Fangio and then all of a sudden you're cooking with gas on the defensive side of the ball would be intriguing for the Chargers. Vic Fangio will definitely have a job somewhere next year. We will definitely be back for another emergency podcast. Almost definitely. When somebody else is fired.
You'll see a lot of us this week.
It'd be like seeing us. For John Breach, I'm Will Brinson. I actually call myself Will Brinson. What the hell is happening around here?
We're falling apart.
I'm Vic Benson.
Will be Renton.
For Vin Breach and Vic Brinson,